Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, debt slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, proletariats. I'm useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about relationship between Henry Kissinger and Vladimir Putin. And as my regulars know, I love these kind of stories that illustrate that things out there in geopolitical land are far more complex than they may look on the surface. And we have a lot of posturing that's done in the media by world leaders, including Vladimir Putin and Barack Obama and anybody else. And a lot of that is gaming. And we should realize that there's a lot of common threads in governments all over the world. And I know there's a lot of people out there who feel like Putin is like a last stand against the Zionists or some kind of last stand against the New World Order, but it really doesn't work that way. Everybody's part of this grand scheme, and they're only jockeying for position in a structure that does ultimately include everyone. There's enough economic interconnection between all these countries in the world, including all the biggest powers, the biggest military powers and economic powers, that they all kind of play from the same game book and have a lot more affinity for themselves. And that's something I've also brought up in a lot of videos is these classes that include these global movers and shakers and these internationalists, they have more of an affinity for their class and the other players internationally than they do for necessarily the throngs, whether it's their own populations or any countries around the globe. So let's get down to some of the details about this little factoid. It's not really a story because it's not in the headlines and it's not a current event, but it's something that's important to keep in mind in looking at these geopolitical events. So in a New York Times article from 2012, they point out that Kissinger and Putin supposedly met, quote, 8 to 10 times, unquote, over the years. And so since we know they're going to try and downplay how many connections there's been, we can probably assume it's been 20 to 30 times. And apparently it's a pretty cozy relationship because Putin even dined with Kissinger at his home in New York. And Kissinger has also been a frequent visitor of Putin's in Russia since 2000. And this is nothing new for Kissinger, of course. He's been mingling with Russian leaders for quite some time and certainly interacted with them both as friends and enemies over the years. And Putin has cited Kissinger as a trusted foreign policy advisor for quite some time. And of course he would be because he's a U.S. insider and an internationalist. And so Putin could certainly get good advice from him, particularly because Kissinger has been an architect for a lot of U.S. foreign policy. So who better to turn to? But sure, everyone can appreciate the irony that somebody used to be Secretary of State and is closely associated with U.S. foreign policy turns out to be best friends with Vladimir Putin. And so much so, Putin is a friend of Kissinger that he even created a bilateral working group in 2007 that's co-chaired by Kissinger and former KGB members and other Russian and American insiders, and dealing with all things foreign policy and geopolitical. And so all these guys like to work together. And in fact, to ram that home in 2007, Vladimir Putin even met with Kissinger and a whole host of Council of Foreign Relations um, members. And of course, most of the people that operate at this level of U.S. government are Council of Foreign Relations members, but nonetheless, this posse of CFR guys, Robert Rubin, George Shultz, and Sam Nunn, have all met with Putin. And let's also remember that Henry Kissinger is a Zionist as well as an internationalist, as it turns out. So once again, Putin overall is part of the loop, and I think people sometimes misunderstand where China and Russia are coming from. They only want to be equal partners in a global distribution of economic resources and trade, and also want to be respected as nations. And of course, Russia and China, with their long histories, have a lot of reason to want to perpetuate that. But as Vladimir Putin even put it, the United States oftentimes doesn't seem to want allies; it wants vassal states. And China Russia and all the other states that the United States considers rogue states are all ones who resist being absorbed as vassal states in the empire. And sometimes it really does boil down to something as simple as that. But I think where it's interesting and complex is thinking about Henry Kissinger and his viewpoints about China needing to be part of the world order and serving as somewhat of a blueprint for whatever corporate world governance is going to look like. And then, as I've mentioned before, Henry Kissinger being an architect for much of U.S. foreign policy, including the expansion of the war in Southeast Asia back during the Vietnam era, and a lot of controversial policies of the United States government under Nixon, and he certainly advised presidents and political campaigners all the way down the line up until recent years. Apparently, he's met with Obama on numerous occasions, and Brzezinski's another one of those type of players, and he's also advised Obama, and these guys seem to approve of the way Obama is operating within the context of what they call a new world order. Their terminology, not mine. So anyway, knowing that Henry Kissinger is a Zionist, Henry Kissinger is a globalist, Henry Kissinger is a foreign policy architect for the United States, Henry Kissinger is a advocate of the New World Order, and Henry Kissinger, as it turns out, is a good friend of Vladimir Putin's, and so these kind of relationships should make it clear what international relationships are really like. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.